Hi, I'm Ali. I'm the VP of Content Creation. I'm here with Professor Natalie Phillips. Professor, thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
So, this is our second episode of the Concordia Students for Parkinson's podcast. And we will each three execs will be taking turns to talk to the professor and ask them questions. So, thank you for joining us. And shall we begin?
Sure.
Thank you. So, Professor, could you just give us a brief introduction of what you do and where your background is?
Sure. So I'm Natalie Phillips. I'm a professor in psychology, and I'm a neuropsychologist, which means I study the brain and cognition and behavior. And I've been interested in working in the field of dementia for a long time now. I did my PhD at Dalhousie University, and I've been at Concordia since 1996, and I have a research laboratory here.
Lovely. That sounds amazing. What do you think about the research that Concordia offers today? Do you think there's like new hope for like neurological disorders?
Oh, yes. So the interesting thing is that we don't have a medical school. Nevertheless, there's a number of faculty members here involved in the area of dementia research. And I'll tell you about some work that we've been doing in the context of the Canadian Consortium on Neurodegeneration and Aging, or the CCNA. So that's quite a mouthful. We'll say the CCNA. And this is a nationwide consortium of about 350 dementia researchers. And it started in 2014. And as part of that consortium, there's two things that I'm particularly involved in. One is a national study of individuals with some kind of dementia. So we've recruited participants who have Alzheimer's disease or vascular causes for dementia, or Parkinson's disease, and also people who are at risk for developing a dementia. And in this large study, we've been collecting quite a bit of data on people's clinical backgrounds, their neuropsychology or their cognition, there's brain imaging, there's genetics, there's a lot of information too about their sensory health, which is something I'm particularly interested in. So there's a number of researchers here at the university who have been working with some of the data coming out of this study. And some of the data that we're just beginning to look at now involves participants who have Parkinson's disease. And one of the goals of this study is to look at the risk factors and the potential mechanisms for developing a neurodegenerative disease or dementia by comparing groups that have a variety of different kinds of neurodegeneration. So as I said before, there's some individuals who have likely Alzheimer's disease. There are people with Parkinson's diagnoses, and more of a vascular presentation. So it is rather than study these groups separately, we're studying them together to look at common pathways and then distinct predictors for these diseases.
Well, yeah, that definitely sounds interesting. And they all, I don't know if this is a scientific term to use, they all have like similar feeling of like how the diseases are. They all affect the brain. They all make your life harder in one way or another, but
Right.
it's all focused on the brain. And if I remember correctly, for Parkinson's, it's like a lack of dopamine, which causes your body to become all shaky. And for Alzheimer's and dementia, they're more similar because they both make you lose brain function compared to when you were when you were younger. I'm just forgetting. From my knowledge, Alzheimer's is basically a gradual loss of memory function, while I believe for dementia. Is it the same or is it?
Right, yeah, I know, this is always a challenge for people. So dementia is just a very umbrella term. And what dementia refers to is that there is some change in two or more areas of cognitive function. So it could be memory, could be problem solving, could be language, could be visual spatial abilities, could be personality and behavior. So there has to be a change in at least two of these areas. It has to be a change from how the person was before, so it's a newly developing disease. And it has to be severe enough to interfere with everyday functions. So that's just an umbrella term, that's what dementia means. It doesn't tell you what's causing those changes. And so Alzheimer's disease is associated with particular abnormal proteins in the brain, and that accounts for about 70% of dementias. But there's also potential vascular causes. There's a class called frontotemporal lobar dementia. Those are associated with different kinds of pathological changes in different areas in the brain. And Parkinson's disease can, in some cases, lead to dementia. So, as I said, so dementia is really the umbrella term, and what you have to figure out is what's the biological cause for the dementia.
It's like a nice little puzzle game.
Yeah, and it's, although I've described it as, these are separate, an individual only has one of these diseases.
Yeah.
It's not true. Often people present with more of a mixed presentation. So we know that having someone who likely has Alzheimer's changes in the brain might also have a lot of vascular disease as well, and that those two kind of amplify each other.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting, and this topic sounds like interesting and fascinating because it's all, like you said, it's all one big. For dementia, you said it was all one big umbrella term, and for science, we have to be as accurate as possible, right?
Yeah.
So, are there like any interesting stories that you've come across, like your research regarding like specific niches or like something extremely unique that you didn't know before you like started the project?
Yeah, so one of the things that my lab has been focused on is the role of sensory decline when we get older, and why are those risk factors for developing a dementia. So in 2017 there was a really influential analysis published by the Lancet Commission, and what it did is it identified 12 modifiable risk factors for dementia, and those together account for about 40% of dementia cases in the population. So 40% is huge. And those 12 modifiable risk factors are low levels of education, low social engagement, poor physical activity, poor nutrition, alcohol use, diabetes, hypertension, air pollution. I don't know if I'll list all 12 of them, but at the top of the list, as the modifiable risk factor that could potentially have the biggest reduction in risk if we were to be able to remove it from the population, is hearing loss. And so in my lab and other labs, we've been really interested on why would hearing loss be a risk factor for developing dementia later in life. And we're also interested in parallel, there's similar evidence for vision loss and actually loss of smell. People who are in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease and also Parkinson's disease very commonly have a loss in their ability to smell. So in my lab, we've been interested in why would having a sensory loss put you at greater risk for developing a dementia? What are the mechanisms? What are the reasons underlying it? So we've been doing a lot of work in that area.
Fascinating. Like we can all throw like ballpark answers. Like for example, for the stuff that you listed, which 40% of which could like help reduce the risk of dementia. You focus on the one thing which could be measured, because like for education, everybody could start reading, they could quit alcohol, they could eat better, go live in the mountains, etc. But you chose on like the one thing which the why factor is still unknown or needs to be studied for.
Yeah, well, I think for all of these, the why factor needs to be better understood. You know, why does having lower social engagement put a person at greater risk? So, so I think for all of them, we need to understand the why better. And I think one thing is important to think about is they're not separate from each other. So an individual who has a hearing loss may also be experiencing changes in their social networks. It becomes more effortful for them to maintain their social networks, to go out to the family party when there's a lot of people talking, so it could be, you know, these factors quite possibly interact with each other. So.
Since your topic is such a complex topic, and you're working with people who have sensory issues or may not be on par with your level of education, is there any are there like any challenges with subjects or with in general in your research?
Well, it's really interesting that you brought up education. So, you know, there's a huge conversation now about having more diverse research participants and research data. And it's really challenging. You know, for decades, we've all, you know, tended to recruit individuals who have higher levels of education, like, you know, they're the people who might be a little more inclined to participate in research, they're more likely to hear about it or to have the resources to be able to participate. So, you know, us and many, many other studies of aging, you know, we really have had the challenge of working with participants who are better educated than the typical population. So that's true for the study that I'm describing. You know, these are all well-educated participants. So we really, for the next phase of this research, are really going to try to diversify the sample so that we're doing more outreach to older adults who have lower levels of education, because we know that education is the most powerful, what we call a social determinant of health. So people with lower levels of education, on average, tend to have poorer health outcomes. And so if we really want to do research that's representative of the population, then we need to include more of those individuals in our research and not just, you know, keep going back to the university educated older adults.
No.
You know, that's such a narrow slice of the population.
I totally get it. Like my grandfather, he had Alzheimer's. He was a working man, and he had Alzheimer's, and it was tough for him. But like I've read books of where people in their like 80s and 90s started learning a bunch of languages just to say, hey, I want to keep my mind sharp.
Right.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it was crazy.
Yeah, and education is only a proxy. You know, that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that people who don't, you know, have a university level education aren't cognitively engaged in doing stimulating activities. But,
Yeah, absolutely.
but to some degree, these things go hand in
Yeah,
hand.
yeah, no, I totally agree. There are tons of forms of intelligence.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned that you were part of a group of 340 researchers and you guys were collaborating on one big project. Are there any other collaborations that you've done?
Well, this is one good example, right? You know, when you're studying dementia, there's no one discipline that can ask, that can answer these questions. It really requires a tremendous array of expertise. So even within psychology, there's all sorts of variation and expertise. So I'm an expert in cognition and how it's affected by brain diseases. There are other people who are experts in social networks and depression and anxiety and the effects of physical activity. So everybody, it does require this breadth of expertise to be able to tackle these questions. There's people in the department who are really expert in brain imaging techniques. So, I rely on them we work together to answer these questions.
So basically doing research not only is like a holistic approach on like trying to like figure out what it is, it's also a holistic approach with like your peers as well, correct?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So these questions about sensory loss, we have a team that I've been working with for 10 years now, and so there's myself, I'm a neuropsychologist. We have someone who's a low vision specialist, so he knows about vision. We have an audiologist who also specializes in cognition. There's a otolaryngologist, so that's a physician who's specialized in his particular specialty is doing cochlear implants. There's gerontology, there's speech-language pathology, there's nursing. So it really does take people with this diversity of knowledge. And I haven't even mentioned the neurologists and the geriatricians that we work with.
So it really does take a whole village, huh?
Yeah, it does in this case.
Yeah. Well, doctor, thank you so much for being with us today, and it was a real pleasure. Well, guys, that's it for my part. Hope you have a good one.